At 10644 Bellagio Road in Bel-Air, on a cold January night in 1979, the house is still awake long after its master is gone. The bronze sculptures in the motor court gleam under damp light. The fountain keeps speaking to itself. Somewhere beyond the hedges, the city glows like a field of embers, careless and eternal. Inside, the oak doors stand 8 feet high. The polished floors hold the memory of footsteps, and the air smells faintly of wax, old roses, cigar smoke, and the last traces of a dinner service that now has no host. Conrad Hilton is dying miles away in Santa Monica. His empire is worth a fortune. His name is on hotels across the world. But here, in the mansion he once called the house where dreams come true, another truth is already moving through the rooms like a draft under a locked door. The servants know before the papers do. They speak softly in hallways lined with lacquer and walnut. A butler who has spent decades in this palace lowers his voice to a whisper. Somewhere a clock ticks with the patience of old money. Somewhere else, a crystal glass is lifted, then set down untouched. Imagine standing there in that foyer, your hand on the cold curve of the banister, listening to a silence so complete you can hear the hum of hidden wiring inside the walls. This is not the silence of peace. It is the silence that comes when a life has ended, but the arguments it created have not. Because the true tragedy waiting in this house is not a single death. It is division, paper, blood. In the years ahead, lawyers will tear through Conrad Hilton's final wishes, his children will fight, his foundation will fight, and the fortune built by a frontier dreamer will become the subject of a bitter struggle over inheritance, duty, control, and love. Not even now, with the marble cool beneath their shoes and the smell of cut flowers fading in silver vases, do they understand how completely this place will come to symbolize the fracture. A mansion did not literally destroy a dynasty, but it became the stage on which that dynasty exposed its deepest fault lines. And yet the story begins not here, in the dim hush after power, but far from Los Angeles, far from the fountain and the golf course, far from this hilltop kingdom. To understand why this house mattered, and why it became a mirror for the Hilton family's ambitions and wounds, we have to go back to a different landscape entirely. Back to dust. Back to New Mexico territory. Back to Christmas Day, 1887, when Conrad Nicholson Hilton was born into a frontier world where there were no carved ceilings, no velvet salons, no Bel-Air invitations, only hard land, commerce, faith, and the restless American habit of wanting more. Conrad's first world did not smell like polished mahogany. It smelled like dry earth, horse leather, wood smoke, and the food of a trading household. He grew up in San Antonio, New Mexico territory, the son of an immigrant father and a German-American mother, in a place where business was not abstract. Business was survival. Money was counted by hand. Goods moved through a store. A boy learned quickly whether a man kept his word. There were no illusions in such a place. The wind cut hard. The light was unforgiving. And somewhere inside that rough beginning, Conrad learned the habit that would define him. He looked at every building and asked what it could become. He was not born into the polished Eastern elite. He was born into the working edge of the country. He served in New Mexico's first state legislature while still young. He served in World War I. He saw uncertainty up close. And when the war ended, his mother reportedly gave him one of those pieces of advice that sounds simple until they run a whole life. Find your own frontier. That frontier, in Conrad Hilton's case, would not be land. It would be hospitality. Not comfort as sentiment, but comfort as industry. Not welcome as virtue, but welcome as system, scale, and empire. In 1919, he headed to Texas planning to buy a bank. Fate, which enjoys disguising great turns as accidents, placed a hotel in his path instead. In Cisco, during the oil boom, he found the Mobley Hotel. The place was crowded, hot, busy, noisy, and profitable. Rooms turned over again and again in a single day because oilmen needed beds more urgently than bankers needed ledgers. Conrad saw what others missed. He did not see threadbare sheets and tired walls. He saw rhythm, cash flow, demand, motion. The lobby smelled of sweat, dust, tobacco, and ambition. Men came and coated with the oil fields, boots clapping against the floorboards, voices sharp with exhaustion and hope. Conrad bought the hotel. That first purchase was not glamorous. It was practical, almost crude. But in practical beginnings, there's often a dangerous purity. Conrad learned that a hotel was more than a building. It was a machine for organizing human need. Shelter, rest, aspiration, status, transaction, repetition. He learned the value of occupancy, the importance of location, the emotional power of service. He learned that if a traveler feels seen, he remembers your name. If a traveler feels important, he returns. And if enough people return, a business becomes a brand, and a brand becomes a dynasty. Success did not arrive all at once. It arrived room by room, property by property, decision by decision. Conrad expanded in Texas. In 1925, the first hotel formally bearing the Hilton name opened in Dallas. Even then, he was thinking structurally. He did not merely want a hotel. He wanted the best hotel in Texas. Facilities were arranged with efficiency in mind. Guest comfort mattered. Reputation mattered more. He built. He expanded. He dominated. Those are the simple verbs, but beneath them lay a more complicated man. Optimistic, disciplined, hard on himself, harder on others, drawn equally to opportunity and control. Look closely at the American dream in this period and you notice something important. It was not simply about riches. It was about legitimacy. A man who could own hotels in Dallas, Waco, New York, and beyond was not just wealthy. He was transformed. He was no longer from the frontier. He was the host of the modern world. Conrad wanted that transformation. He wanted scale, and scale in the 20th century required vision, nerve, and a tolerance for loneliness. Every empire begins by narrowing a person. It teaches them to prioritize the next acquisition over the present tenderness. Little did the people closest to him know that the very qualities making Conrad Hilton formidable in business could make him difficult in love. In his personal life, the pattern was more fractured. His first marriage, to Mary Adelaide Barron, gave him sons and the appearance of family continuity, but marriage and empire make poor roommates when ambition never sleeps. There were children, expectations, separations, and eventually divorce. Later, there was his famously troubled marriage to Zsa Zsa Gabor, a union of glamour, ego, and collision that ended in bitterness. By then, the Hilton name had become a public spectacle, and spectacle is a dangerous thing for a family. It turns private pain into entertainment. It teaches children that their surname enters a room before they do. While Conrad was building his chain, the nation itself was changing around him. The Great Depression scarred millions. Social ranks stiffened and shifted. In Los Angeles, wealth became performance. Bel-Air, Beverly Hills, and Holmby Hills became theaters of arrival, where outsiders bought land, not merely to live, but to announce themselves. Houses were no longer shelters. They were arguments made in stone. They said, "I belong here. I have one. Look at my terrace. Look at my gates. Look at how far from ordinary I now stand." By the 1940s, Conrad Hilton was no longer simply a successful hotel operator. He was becoming an American institution. In 1943, Hilton became the first coast-to-coast hotel chain in the United States. In 1946, Hilton Hotels Corporation was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, the first hotel company to do so. In 1947, televisions entered guest rooms at a Hilton property. In 1948, a multi-hotel reservation system arrived. In 1949, Hilton International was born, and Conrad purchased the Waldorf Astoria in New York, a move so dramatic it made national headlines. That same year, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine, the first hotelier to do it. By 1954, his purchase of the Statler Hotels for $111 million became the largest real estate transaction the world had seen. This was not merely growth. It was conquest with lobby music. And still, for all that movement, he remained drawn to the idea of home. Not a modest home, not a private refuge tucked discreetly away. Conrad Hilton wanted the kind of house that could hold his legend. The kind of house where a man who had mastered public hospitality could attempt, perhaps vainly, to master private life. He found that house in Bel-Air, but he was not its first dreamer. To understand Casa Encantada, we must first understand the woman who built it and nearly destroyed herself doing so. Her name was Hilda Weber. She was not born into the aristocracy of Los Angeles. She arrived from a different social weather entirely. According to later accounts, she had worked as a nurse in New York before marrying Charles Bolt, an older glass manufacturer from the Midwest. When he died, she inherited immense wealth. In the snob mathematics of old society, however, money alone was not enough. Birth mattered. Taste mattered. The right lineage mattered. Los Angeles, for all its sunshine and fantasies of reinvention, could be as cruelly hierarchical as any old capital. Hilda had money, but not pedigree. In such worlds, humiliation ripens into architecture. In 1936, in the middle of the Great Depression, Hilda purchased a commanding hilltop site above the Bel-Air Country Club for $100,000, a staggering sum then, roughly the equivalent of more than $2 million today. That purchase alone was a declaration. While others hesitated, she bought altitude. She hired architect James E. Delina, who described the style as modern Georgian with Grecian influences. She brought in landscape architect Benjamin Purdy. She commissioned the brilliant designer T.H. Robs-John Gibbings for interiors and furnishings. This was not a house. It was a campaign. The cornerstone was laid in May 1937. Construction advanced with relentless extravagance. Reinforced concrete, stone-colored finishes, custom interiors, axial planning, classical references, sculptural gardens, terraces, outbuildings, servant spaces, guest accommodations. Every element said the same thing. Ordinary wealth is not enough. This must be unforgettable. By December 1938, the project had consumed more than $2 million, roughly $45 million in current terms, and likely swallowed almost all of Hilda's fortune. The danger was already there, hidden beneath the polish. Money can build a facade faster than it can build stability. Imagine arriving that first season. A winding drive, a fountain at the motor court, bronze sculpture catching the Southern California light. The air scented with clipped boxwood, wet stone, orange blossoms drifting from neighboring gardens, gravel crunching under tires. Footmen at the door. The facade rising in pale symmetry, calm and commanding, half ancient fantasy, half modern power move. The house was laid out on an H-shaped plan and spread across an estate that today is measured at roughly 8.4 acres. Historically, the whole property with outbuildings approached 40,000 square feet, while current tax records place the main residence at about 28,725 square feet. The numbers matter, yes, but numbers alone cannot tell you what such scale feels like. It feels like a person trying to outbuild insecurity. Shortly after Christmas in 1938, Hilda reportedly introduced the estate to society with a seated dinner for 250 guests followed by dancing at a cost of about $50,000, more than $1 million in today's money. Louis B. Mayer is said to have looked at the house and declared that had he not seen it himself, he would not have believed such a residence existed in the world. That is how Bel-Air works at the top. Your house becomes a rumor before it becomes an address. Guests moved through rooms perfumed with flowers and hot food, silk and perfume, wax and champagne. Music drifted through the halls. The silver flashed. The laughter rose. And somewhere beneath all the spectacle was a woman asking the oldest social question of all. Do you accept me now? But acceptance purchased at that price is never secure. Staff multiplied. Accounts grew. Maintenance devoured cash. Some descriptions speak of over 40 employees across house and grounds. Others remember armies of servants and gardeners. Rooms for servants finished more richly than many people's homes. Marble where humility might have sufficed. Hilda had built not just a mansion, but a machine of consumption. It needed labor, heating, polishing, trimming, replacing, supervising, feeding. Grandeur is not static. It eats. Now, let us step inside because Casa Encantada was designed to impress on approach and then seduce in sequence. First came the grand entry and foyer. Guests entered through massive oak doors into a world of controlled awe. The ceiling rose high. The surfaces glowed. A circular or sweeping stair announced movement upward, but also hierarchy. This was a room that did psychological work. It told visitors to lower their voices. It told them that the woman who owned this house had climbed farther than they expected. The stone beneath one's shoes was cool and faintly resonant. The walls carried sound in a softened echo. The air felt conditioned not by machinery alone, but by ritual. Servants had passed, flowers had been placed, light had been arranged, and no one was meant to forget where they stood. Beyond that lay the gallery and reception spaces, where floor-to-ceiling windows opened toward the southern patios and lawns. Here the house performed its most Californian trick. It used light like a social weapon. Sun spilled across polished floors. Breezes carried the scent of cut grass and damp earth from the terraces. The line between inside and outside softened, and the horizon of the Bel-Air Country Club seemed almost borrowed as private scenery. This was a house built to make land feel obedient. To stand there was to understand why rich people become metaphysical. A room with that much view convinces its owner that fate itself may be negotiated. Then there was the walnut-paneled library, one of the estate's most revealing rooms. Libraries in great houses are often less about reading than about moral staging. Dark wood, leather, lamp glow, the dry papery smell of bindings, the muffled quiet that invites confidence. Here, a magnate could appear reflective even if he was merely strategic. Conrad Hilton would later find in such a room something he understood instinctively. Authority likes enclosure. The library says the owner is not merely rich but serious. Not merely acquisitive but civilized. But what paneling cannot give wisdom to a fool, and a room cannot soften a heart that has become too accustomed to command. The dining room was another statement altogether. Its hand-lacquered walls and formal setting turned eating into theater. Silver, crystal, linen, candles reflected in polished surfaces. The fragrance of roasted meats, sauces, wine, citrus, and cut flowers mixing with the faint wax smell of the room itself. A junior dining room existed for smaller gatherings, proving the scale of the enterprise. Even intimacy required architecture. Hilda, and later, Conrad understood something crucial about power. Real power does not merely feed people. It choreographs how they are fed. The formal salons and informal living rooms told yet another story. One could imagine hushed afternoon conversations on upholstered furniture, cocktails by evening, the clink of ice, the soft hiss of a cigarette, the rustle of silk, the low hum of a deal forming between two men who never intended to call a deal. Later restorations preserved and revived details like a lucite bar that feels lifted from a 1940s movie set. Room after room after room of elegance. And yet elegance here was never innocent. It was a language of rank. Below, in the basement, the mood changed. Vaults for silver, fur, and wine gave the house a colder psychology. Basements reveal what owners fear losing. Silver vaults say ritual. Fur vaults say status. Wine vaults say continuity, planning, legacy, the slow pleasure of possession. Down there the air would have been cooler, drier, carrying the smell of cork, wood, metal, and stone. Less display, more control. Great houses often tell the truth underground. Outside, the pool, gardens, and tennis areas completed the illusion of sovereign life. A 60-foot tiled pool stretched like a stripe of captured sky. Rose gardens, orchards, herb and vegetable plantings, tropical botanical gestures, rolling lawns, and a tennis pavilion transformed the estate into a private kingdom. There was even reportedly a tunnel connecting the property to the Bel-Air Country Club fairways. The kind of detail so extravagant it borders on myth, and yet perfectly suits the logic of the place. Why walk the ordinary route when you can pass from your own fantasy world into another through a hidden artery? A house like this does not merely shelter desire. It spatializes it. And what did all this reveal about Hilda Weber? Everything. The house showed hunger, refinement, Yes, but also hunger. It showed a person trying to translate money into permanence, humiliation into acceptance, spectacle into belonging. But architecture can magnify the soul's contradictions. The larger the estate became, the more exposed her motives were. She wanted to enter society by building a palace, but in doing so she reminded society that she was still petitioning entry. Little did she know that the mansion would become both her crown and her undoing. By the late 1940s, the costs were crushing. Casa Encantada was reportedly offered for sale around 1948 for $1.5 million, far below what it had cost to create. Buyers admired it, but hesitated. Great houses are expensive to love. Hilda's social gamble had failed financially. Accounts of her personal life turned harsher, sadder, more desperate. She sold other property. She was increasingly isolated. In the winter of 1949 to 1950, Conrad Hilton acquired the estate and its contents for about $225,000, an astonishing collapse from its original cost, roughly $3 million in current value for one of the grandest houses in America. Not long afterward, Hilda, reportedly overwhelmed by debts and despair, died by suicide. There is no need to sensationalize that ending. It is tragic enough as it is. A woman built a palace to secure her place in the world and lost herself inside the arithmetic of keeping it alive. Conrad, however, fell in love at once. He called it love at first sight. He renamed it Casa Encantada, the enchanted house. That renaming matters. Hilda had built a monument to acceptance. Conrad made it part of his myth. When he moved in, the mansion entered its second great life, and perhaps its most famous one. Under him, the house became less a bid for entry and more a throne room for arrival. You can almost see the transformation. The same doors, the same halls, but a different owner changes a building's temperature. Under Conrad Hilton, Casa Encantada became the residence of a man who had, by then, mastered the modern hotel empire. He preserved much of what Hilda had commissioned, including the Rob John Gibbings aesthetic that later observers would call a time capsule of high 1940s taste. That preservation reveals something intriguing about Conrad. Though he was an empire builder, he was not always a vandal. He understood the power of existing grandeur. He did not need to erase the house's past in order to occupy it. He only needed to claim it. This was the high noon of the Hilton legend. Heads of state, celebrities, society figures, and business titans passed through the house. The driveway heard the slow roll of polished cars. The foyer received tuxedos and perfume and silk. The library held conversations too private for hotel lobbies. The dining rooms hosted rituals of influence. Outside, Los Angeles stretched below like a kingdom of heat and illusion. The city smelled of eucalyptus, gasoline, orange blossoms, and possibility. Inside the house, the smell was richer. Flowers, polished wood, expensive food, cigars, old books, starched linen, and a faint metallic coolness of silver service. Conrad must have loved the irony of it. He, the hotel man, now presided over one of the country's greatest private residences. All his life, he had sold hospitality to strangers. Here he owned hospitality itself, distilled into architecture. Yet even at the peak, the hidden cracks were forming. That is always the rule. While the mansion rose above the city in perfect composure, time was preparing its little cruelties. His family life remained troubled. His children lived in the shadow of a surname that opened doors and complicated souls. Conrad Hilton Jr., the glamorous, troubled heir known as Nicky, became famous for excess and personal instability and died in 1969. A decade before his father. The Hilton name became associated not just with success, but with scandal, beautiful people, difficult marriages, public embarrassments, private pain. Wealth protected the family from ordinary hardship, but not from distortion. In families like these, love is often present, but it is forced to compete with expectation, inheritance, and the question every child quietly asks, if I stripped away the name, would I still matter? Conrad himself grew older, more reflective, more philanthropic, and in some ways more severe. He established the Conrad Hilton Foundation in 1944 and increasingly turned his thoughts toward charity, religion, peace, and legacy. He believed international travel fostered goodwill. He hosted major public events, advocated moral causes, and imagined his wealth doing work beyond bloodline. At the same time, court records and later reporting make clear that he came to distrust the idea of leaving great unearned wealth to children. He seems to have feared that inherited fortune could deform character, soften discipline, invite dependence, and ultimately weaken a family rather than strengthen it. This was not a sentimental patriarch planning a gentle distribution. This was a self-made emperor deciding whether dynasty itself was a mistake. By then, Casa Encantada had become the ideal setting for such thoughts. The house was both proof and warning. Proof that ambition can shape a world. Warning that possessions become burdens, and beauty can outlive happiness with indifferent ease. Imagine Conrad in the library late at night, the city lights beyond the glass, the smell of leather and wood surrounding him, the weight of paper before him as wills were drafted and redrafted. By some accounts, he made dozens of wills over the course of his life. Think about what that means. A man rewrites the fate of his family again and again, searching for a moral geometry that money refuses to obey. He loved family, no doubt, but not in a simple way. He loved institutions too. He loved faith, work, order, purpose. And here is the contradiction that defines many founders. The habits that make them generous to humanity in the abstract can make them difficult with the humans closest to them in particular. He could imagine relieving suffering across the world. He found it harder to trust what abundance might do inside his own bloodline. In his final arrangements, Conrad left the overwhelming bulk of his estate to the foundation that bore his name. More than 99% of the residue was intended for charity, while non-charitable bequests were comparatively small. There is also a complicated option for his son Baron tied to Hilton stock, partly as protection against a hostile takeover. It was not a clean disinheritance, but it was close enough to wound. A father had built an empire that carried his name across continents. Yet at the end he chose principle over hereditary ease, or believed he did. Some would call that discipline. Others would call it a final assertion of control from beyond the grave. Both may be true. And so we return to that January night in 1979. Conrad Hilton dies of pneumonia in Santa Monica at the age of 91. The news moves outward. The house where dreams come true is now a mausoleum of suspended power. The city wakes to obituaries. Staff members move carefully through the rooms. The house remains beautiful. Beauty is the cruelest witness because it does not grieve aloud. It simply remains. Then the lawyers come. The blow is not theatrical at first. No one smashes a glass in slow motion. No one screams beneath the chandelier. Real dynastic collapse often arrives in envelopes and hearings, appraisals and probate language. Conrad's daughter contests the will. Baron Hilton and the foundation enter into a bitter dispute over stock, control, valuation, and his father's intentions. The estate becomes a battlefield of clauses. The numbers are staggering. Hilton's stock, estate values, controlling interests, options priced according to old appraisals while market values soar. But beneath all the millions lies a smaller and sadder drama. The children of a giant discovering that his love and his trust were not distributed in the same way. How could this happen? Because wealth concentrates power, and power tempts people to continue ruling after death. Because founders often believe only they can see clearly. Because children raised under towering names rarely inherit merely assets. They inherit unfinished arguments. Casa Encantada did not create those arguments, but framed them. Every room seemed to ask the same question. If a man can build this, why can he not build peace in his own house? The aftermath was unsentimental. After Conrad's death, the family sold Casa Encantada in 1980 to David Murdoch for $12.4 million, at the time the most expensive home sale in the United States. Even in departure, the house set records. That is what makes these places feel cursed to some people. They do not descend gently into ordinary time. They keep making headlines. They keep proving that excess has a market, even when grief still hangs in the curtains. Murdoch renamed it Bellagio House and altered elements of the property. Furnishings were sold. Collections changed. Landscapes shifted. Another billionaire entered the frame. The house went on. There's a harsh lesson in that. No matter how intimately an owner believes he possesses a house, the house belongs more permanently to history than to him. It absorbs personalities and outlasts them. Hilda vanished. Conrad vanished. The fountain kept running. New hands touched the banister. New voices filled the salons. New gardeners trimmed old hedges. The mansion remained what it had always been, a vessel for power, changing flags without changing form. And yet the Hilton story did not end in pure bitterness. Baron Hilton eventually carried forward much of his father's philanthropic logic, helping grow the foundation and later committing the vast majority of his own fortune to as well. This matters. Tragedies in great families are rarely absolute. The children may resent the father and still echo him. They may fight the terms and later adopt the principle. Baron, who once battled over his father's arrangements, ultimately reinforced the charitable legacy in extraordinary fashion. That is not simple redemption. It is more interesting than redemption. It is inheritance transformed through struggle. Look closely and you see the pattern. Conrad believed money should serve something beyond pleasure. Baron, after conflict and success of his own, seems to have reached a similar conclusion. The dynasty did not end in the mansion, not literally. It splintered there, yes. It was exposed there, but also evolved. The Hilton name moved away from the static image of inherited opulence and deeper into the paradox of American wealth. Fortunes built in capitalism, then redirected toward philanthropy, even as the family itself remained famous for glamour, celebrity, and public fascination. The house on Bellagio Road became the perfect symbol for this contradiction. A palace funded by ambition, haunted by insecurity, and preserved through successive attempts to give private wealth some larger meaning. After Murdoch came another chapter. In 2000, financier Gary Winnick purchased the estate for $94 million, once again making it the most expensive house sold in the United States. Peter Marino oversaw a major restoration, reportedly involving daily teams of craftspeople, layers of hand-polished finishes, and painstaking revival of historical details. It was stewardship on a grand scale, but also a reminder that palaces require constant rescue from entropy. The Winnicks spent years and millions preserving what previous decades had not erased. In their care, the house became both restored artwork and ultra-luxury commodity. This, too, is part of the story's irony. Casa Encantada began as a social weapon, became a magnate's private kingdom, then matured into a collectible object of American history. By the 21st century, it was not merely a home. It was a trophy, a landmark, a symbol of irreplaceable craftsmanship. Brokers and journalists described it as one of the most important houses in Los Angeles, maybe even in the country. Yet even masterpieces must face the market. In recent years, the property was listed at prices as high as $250 million, then cut again and again. For all its prestige, the house struggled to find a buyer at the top of the stratosphere. By early 2026, it was back on the market around $170 million amid a separate and bitter legal and financial battle involving debts and foreclosure pressure surrounding the Winnick estate. And there it is again, the same old rhythm. Build, ascend, display, strain, sell, rescue, relist. The house keeps replaying the moral of its first owner. Wealth can summon artisans, acres, and symmetry. It can summon fountains, vaults, rose gardens, and polished staircases. But it cannot guarantee ease. It cannot guarantee acceptance. It cannot guarantee that the next generation will understand what the first one was trying to prove. Money could buy marble but not time. It could buy views but not peace. It could build a fortress for a family and still somehow become the place where the family understood how fragile its foundations really were. Imagine standing there today in the foyer. The same staircase, the same gravity, the same sense that every object has been touched by people who expected permanence. You can almost hear layers of history speaking at once. Hilda's anxious hope, Conrad's disciplined certainty, the footfall of servants, the murmur of elite guests, the rustle of legal papers, the private grief of heirs, the practical voice of a broker discussing acreage and restoration. That is what extraordinary houses become. Not homes exactly. Archives of emotion disguised as real estate. What then destroyed the Hilton Dynasty? Not a mansion alone. Not a will alone. Not greed alone. Dynasties are undone by the collision of love, ego, succession, principle, and myth. Casa Encantada mattered because it concentrated those forces in one unforgettable place. It allowed the world to imagine the Hiltons as royalty of the American century. And then, through death and dispute, it revealed how even royalty cannot simplify inheritance. The larger the house, the louder the echo. The more perfect the facade, the more shocking the crack. And still, the mansion endures. Its lawns descend in manicured calm. Its pool catches the sky. Its walnut library still promises wisdom to whoever enters. Its dining room still waits for a host. Its vaults still smell faintly of the things rich people fear losing. Its terraces still open toward a city that reinvents itself every decade and never quite changes at all. Bel-Air remains what it has always been, a district of glittering solitude, where distance from the street is part of the luxury and silence is often more expensive than noise. There is a temptation, in stories like this, to choose heroes and villains. Hilda as tragic fool, Conrad as cold patriarch, Baron as wounded heir, society as hypocrite. But life is rarely so neat. Hilda built magnificence because she wanted dignity and belonging. Conrad built an empire because he believed work, vision, and scale could shape a better world. Baron fought because inheritance is never only about money. It is also about recognition. Even the house itself is not guilty. It merely reflects the desires of those who enter it. It is a mirror made of concrete, wood, glass, lacquer, bronze, water, and light. Maybe that is the final wisdom of Casa Encantada. Every mansion is a philosophy written in rooms. This one says that ambition can be beautiful. It says beauty can be ruinous. It says social hunger can carve stone. It says fathers can love mankind and misunderstand their children. It says children can resist a legacy and then continue it. It says the things we build to prove our strength often expose our vulnerability most clearly. Now the circle closes. We return to the quiet house on Bellagio Road, to the night when a master was dying and the rooms had already begun their long work of surviving him. Outside, the fountain still moves. The air is cool. The hedges hold their shadows. Somewhere beyond the gates, Los Angeles keeps glittering in its careless way. Inside, the great doors remain standing, and the house waits, as houses do, for the next name, the next fortune, the next dream brave enough or foolish enough to call itself permanent. Conrad Hilton once saw this place as enchantment. Hilda Weber saw it as salvation. Later owners saw it as history, prestige, rarity, leverage, treasure. But perhaps Casa Encantada has always been something simpler and sadder. A lesson on a hill. A reminder that empires do not usually collapse in fire. They fray in silence. In signatures. In inheritance. In the cold space between what a parent meant and what a child heard. And if you listen carefully, in the hush of that grand foyer, with the smell of old polish and roses lingering in the air, you can almost hear the house whisper the truth that none of its owners ever fully escaped. Dreams may come true here, yes, but sooner or later, they come due.